All those moments will be lost in time, like tears in rain. I was probably 18 when I first heard that specific line, and I didn't fully understand it the first time that I heard it. But a few minutes after the film finished, an hour later, a day after, a week, a month, a year, and now years, I am somewhat on the verge of fully understanding what it truly meant. This specific line was written by the actor who played Roy Batty in the film Blade Runner, who is Rutger Hauer. There are a lot of stories about this specific line coming to life, one of them coming from the director themselves, Ridley Scott, stating that it was a monologue written by the actor, and they simply asked for an opportunity to somewhat say that specific line before they die. And when Ridley got to hear it and see it through, they decided that everything has happened in that specific film. It all leads to that specific monologue at the end. And it's something that is not just a piece of writing from an actor who knows their craft well, but also a story of what it truly feels like to be human. And I was too young to fully understand that when I was 18, but that specific line stuck with me. And it's something that I have grown to adore and somewhat live by, hopefully not for a very long time anymore. That was a time when I was still struggling in terms of my finances. I wasn't even fourth year college at that time. I was in my third year, and it was that specific turning point in my life where I started reading books and novels. And when I started researching about this film, I saw that it is based off of a novel by Philip K. Dick called Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. And this novel in itself is something that I hold dear, something that I will keep forever because of not only Blade Runner being one of my favorite stories of all time, but this is the very first novel that I ever bought firsthand. I was a college student at that time, and I just depend on my allowances from my scholarships to feed myself every single day and get by. And luckily enough, when I got like the stipend in a bulk, I thought to myself, I should reward myself by buying a book that is no longer secondhand or third hand or from a book sale, but instead something that is completely mine. This is one of my most prized possessions, something that I will forever hold dear, something that I will forever display in my library of novels here and stories, something that I will keep forever. Not just for the factor that it's my first-hand novel I ever bought with my own money, but at the same time, this story is one of the best things I've ever read. When I first read it, I thought to myself, this is the best novel that I've ever read. But now I think managing to read more than I think hundreds of books at this moment in time, this is still one of the best things I've ever read, and I fully understood it or understand it now better than I did when I was 18. So 7 years in the making. So I decided to read this a week ago and managed to finish it in 2 or 3 days. That quick. I was so involved in this story. It's something that I just can't get enough of. And just to give an idea, this was written by Philip K. Dick, the same writer of Valis, Scanner Darkly, Ubik, and some other stories that were put into film, not just this one, but Minority Report, and so on and so forth. So they have tons of timeless science fiction ideas that has grown to the culture, not necessarily just for literature, but also for filmmaking. And what I would like to talk about here in particular is how this story transcends what the lore is about these concepts about being a Blade Runner. So I'll start first with this novel in particular. I know the title says Blade Runner, but that wasn't really the plan because that one is given thanks to the film. So the original title and the only title of this one in particular is Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? This tells the story of the same character in the film, which is Rick Deckard, who has an electric sheep in their house. And one of the key points in this novel that is not in the movie is taking good care of animals that doesn't exist, that are artificial. So in this particular novel also, Deckard has a wife, and that's something that was never involved or mentioned in the film. So in this novel, he has a wife named Iran, and he is not a Blade Runner. He is called a bounty hunter who kills Andes. So that's a term for the replicants in here. Basically, they are robots that are humanoid-like, or basically humans, but androids or whatever they are in particular. So the film and the novel follows the same concept on how they can identify an Andy or a replicant from one another. So they have this test called the Void Camp test, which they do in order to see if someone is not human at all. It is based off of how someone answers and how their eyes dilate. And it's something that it's a little bit time consuming to just identify which one is human and which one isn't. But the novel managed to find a way to make it real and somewhat realistic that these replicants or Andes will not just automatically kill these bounty hunters while taking said tests. They have to find their way to make themselves fit in this story and be human like. And the thing about this novel is that we are reading it in the eyes of Rick Deckard. So we see it through his eyes. We get to see his thoughts also come into play, which is something that the movie doesn't have in particular. And what makes this novel somewhat different is that it didn't focus with the questions of the main character questioning their identity, but more about their beliefs. One of the key points in this novel is there's a famous TV show which is called Buster Friendly, and it's basically something that the entire world is watching, and they're also like this gossip kind of thing, and they have this big revelation about a certain fixture in the society that is a false god of sorts. One of the things that I appreciate about this novel is that it didn't shy away from those things that could be dealt with in terms of living in a society that is far too different to what we have now. With Blade Runner or Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, with the rise of these Andes or human-like machines or androids, they were able to also involve the idea of religion, which they call Mercerism in this particular novel, where they follow this person called Mercer who is pushing a boulder endlessly and tirelessly, and they get to connect with him through video. They have this particular box wherein they can set up their moods, they can talk to their God, and so on and so forth. So they get to be fascinated with these things and somewhat have their emotions held, controlled through these particular objects, and they depend on that. It's a particular plot device that was used to somewhat tell that these characters are holding on to something, literally and figuratively. They depend on this box with their emotions, with their beliefs, with their faith. And not only that, they think of these things, especially with the main point of the drive as to why Rick Deckard wants to hunt these Andes down, these replicants down, is for the money to buy himself an actual animal. One of the key points of this novel is the obsession to have something that is real, to hold on to something that is real. So he has an electric sheep on their house, but he's faking it that it's real. But at the end of the day, they just want to make sure that they'll be looked at as someone different. So even though he was hesitant to take this job as a bounty hunter, he decided to push through so that he will be able to buy himself an animal. This particular novel also involves the same characters in the film, but with differences in terms of the name and the way they were presented. This particular novel also showcases Rick Deckard as to how he looks at the Andes and how he felt guilt when he got fascinated by this one particular robot or android showing these kinds of skills without harming anybody of sorts from his eyes, and he had no choice but to retire that particular android. So you get to see these different visions of someone questioning whether what they're doing is right or wrong, to the point that he doesn't want to do it anymore. And then he meets a particular android with the name of Rachel, who is one of the Nexus 6 class of these Andes or androids that are just indistinguishable to humans, to the point that when they took the test, it took them a while to just get that. And one of the obsessions in here is that they wanted to be human in terms of the feeling. They have these emotions, they have these feelings, and they question everything. So when they are addressed to being questioned what they are, they question Deckard back if Deckard is human or not. It's a simple question that they didn't dive well in deep in the novel. They did it in a different way. So when everything is all said and done, when he managed to retire all of the Andes in here, so the way that I'm speaking in here, it's anticlimactic. He just managed to kill all of them by the end of it all. And he decided that he doesn't know what he's doing. And he even bought himself a sheep, an actual sheep, but it was killed later on. And so he decided to just get lost in the desert where no one is. And he found himself a toad. And he was like, huh, why is there an animal all of a sudden in the middle of nowhere? So he took this animal home thinking that it might be something that's real. But then at the end of it all, it turns out to be something that is fake. So all these concepts of the obsession of getting something that is real just to feel something else. And turning out that the one that they believe in, the God that they believe in, being Mercer under the Mercerism religion, is a false God as revealed in the famous TV show Buster Friendly. Dickard starts to question his fate, thinking that maybe he is Mercer. Like those kinds of beliefs and ideals involving like being God or being a false God, all those things. He felt like he's someone who's keeping him pushing this endless boulder further and further, just trying to make sense of everything. And at the end of it all, he just gave up. He just gave up at the end of it all. And that's how this particular novel ended. The thing is, what they emphasized here is the obsession to believe in something that's real, to the point that at the end of it all, when they realized that what they had were not all, mostly artificial, they just surrendered to it and somewhat believe in the reality of their own fiction. So they gave up on that. And that's the particular beauty of this novel, that sometimes we just have to go on and not make sense out of everything and just live on to it. I think the beauty of it is the complexity of these characters and how they look at life differently, trying to make sense out of it through religion, through material things, through living things, but still not getting it by the end of it all, even with everything that they do. So it's kind of anticlimactic in terms of the ending. It's not as action packed as the film made it to be. But I think the greatest thing that I can take away from this novel is the idea of how someone's fate, someone's belief can push them further and further just to find something. And unfortunately for the character here, he wasn't able to find anything that's worth pushing to. Even the androids in here or the Andes, they just wanted to understand what it's like to be alive and how to be alive. and just be their own person. But they are limited. They're limited with their time, and all they have is each other. So at the end of it all, everything just ends. And it's a dystopian world where nobody really gets what they wanted at the end of it all. So it's fascinating how this particular story is told into multiple journeys of different people, from Blade Runner to Blade Runner 2049, and even Blade Runner Black Lotus, even three short films that was written and directed to promote Blade Runner 2049. And the world is still growing in terms of how complex and how beautiful this idea is. So, from this novel in particular, they decided to adapt it to screen, helmed by Ridley Scott, to Blade Runner in particular, which is instead of bounty hunter, they call them Blade Runners, and instead of Andes, they call them replicants. And I think that's one of the biggest upgrades that they've done, not only with the title, not only is it iconic, but also with the idea of replicants being these androids that are replicating what it's like to be human. So from the name itself, it's really something that you would really appreciate and somewhat be fascinated by, and how with a minor change like that, you get to tell such a complex story already. And when they made this film in particular, there are three different, or four or five, or hundreds of different versions of this one, and it didn't do well in the box office at that time, especially with the way it's presented. But as time passes by, it became a cult classic and one of the finest pieces of film in the entire world for the way that it presented itself. I kind of find it fascinating how, I keep using the word fascinating, but it's just beautiful the way this film looks like, especially with it being shot at night, if not all or most of it at the dark, and you just see the city being filled with a sea of different cultures. I love that part wherein they predicted that in this particular time of the year, like 2019 is the time frame in this particular film in Los Angeles. And it's not filled with Americans or whatever. It's filled with different people, different cultures. And you can see it in how things are promoted. The iconic scene wherein they have flying cars just flying over the buildings, and you see this big LED billboards, which is something that is so true to this day and age. I love the way that they have predicted that, and the way that the culture will infiltrate one another and somewhat colonize one another without anyone knowing it, or just basically blindly accepting it. So, with the way that they presented this film, the best thing that they've done is to maximize the concept that was set by the novel in terms of the setting. So we all know that the universe in the novel is that there are people off world that are in Mars. And in the film, that's also the story. What I love about the novel and the film is that they never involved any scenes in Mars, neither the escape of the androids. Instead, they just stuck with the story that we have with Rick Deckard. One of the biggest changes from the film compared to the novel is removing the wife aspect of it. So Deckard doesn't have a wife. Deckard doesn't have a sheep nor anything at all. He doesn't take care of any animals. But they used that idea and put it in the film as a minor plotline in order to find one of the androids in this film, or one of the replicants, when they found a snake, an artificial snake, and tracked them down to find where this person is located. This replicant is located. Even I am having a hard time to differentiate the two, but that's the purpose of the story and altogether. So in that particular part, I find it fascinating how they made it all make sense. Like one of the things that is difficult to show is how will you deal with the religion part in here. So they took it out. There's no Mercer and Mercerism in here. It was not mentioned. There's some glimpses of idea of religion in this film, but I think that one is better used in 2049, which is a film for another day. But the idea of this film just having Deckard just being forced to somewhat go back to being a Blade Runner because there's no one else who can do it but him. And I kind of find it funny at first when I first watched the film that Deckard doesn't have any actual skills. He's not really that good. He gets his ass kicked all the time by the replicants. But then you realize, oh yes, they got off world with brute strength, so it's understandable. Even the characters in the film and the novel, they are differentiated in terms of the way they were presented, especially with Rachel. Rachel is more replicant-like in the film compared to the novel where Rachel kind of showed emotions. But the thing that I appreciate with Rachel in here in particular, played by Sean Young, she did a fantastic job of showcasing a replicant who thought that she was ever alive, that she was ever human, and with it actually showing emotions, which is one of the questions in the world of Blade Runner. What makes someone human? And first, is it about emotions? Is it about soul? That was the purpose of the test that they were doing, the repetitive questions to see through the how these replicants act when they get asked questions about empathy, about emotions, and all of that. One of the changes also that is noticeable is that when you read the novel first, one of the main characters here is called J.F. Isidore, who is called a chicken head, basically someone who also fails the void camp test even though they are human. It's basically a problem with their mental capacity. So instead of being J Isidore, they turn into JF Sebastian. I think it's a matter of the way the characters are. They have similarities, but they maximize the character here, not only with the name change, but with the idea that he plays a huge role as someone that is connected to the corporation who creates the replicants. He became a huge plot point in that matter. There is no TV show in here like Buster Friendly, no religion, no box. Those things were adapted better and actually used in 2049 in a different manner, which is something for another day, like I said. But with the way that this film went, especially one of my favorite things in here is Gaff's character. He's also involved in the novel. Basically, he's the one who took Deckard back to the office to somewhat be informed that he needs to be a Blade Runner again. But his character in here, they added something in particular that made the film what it is today. I know that Roy Batty's character here by Rutger Hauer is one of the biggest standout, but with Gaff's actions in here, he basically has dialogues that are just, hey, Deckard, Rick Deckard, hey, let's go, Deckard. All that. It's just like that. He's just calling Rick, fetching him, taking him to some place. But in particular pieces of the film, he creates these things from pieces of paper, basically an origami. So from a chicken to different animals. And the last thing that he did is a unicorn, which is a huge plot point in the film. I think the beauty of this film is that we never get to actually hear the intrusive thoughts or basically the ideas that come to Deckard's mind compared to the novel, where you really just get to dive in deep to what he is thinking. Instead, you get to see Deckard being as cold, as calculated as he is. He even had, I think, a very uncomfortable scene with Rachel, with Sean Young's character, in terms of him just trying to get emotions out of her. It's a little bit uncomfortable, but it also showcases how these two are acting replicant like in here. That's one of those signs too. And one of the most important pieces of information that we get from the novel is that Deckard questioned himself by the end of the film. And that's something that somewhat made sense. While in the middle of the film, where he was napping after drinking a lot, he had this dream about a unicorn. just passing by. No context, no explanation. So he got to dream about this unicorn, and then by the end of the film, he and Rachel tried to escape, but then before he left, he saw that there's a paper unicorn, which is actually the reason why I tattooed it in here. A paper unicorn at the door. And then they went to the elevator. That's the end of the film. I think the beauty of that particular scene, the reason why I'm starting with that is because it's more about the film direction, not the part that really translated well to me yet. I love the beauty of that is because we know that Gaff was there. Gaff was there, and he didn't turn Deckard over with Rachel, but somewhat left a specific message. Why would someone leave a unicorn to Deckard? And it's one of those reasons why there are theories until now that will never be answered if Deckard really is human or a replicant. But that somewhat gets a little bit of an answer in the 2049 film and then gets confused again by the 2049 film. That's the beauty of it. But the main point of that is Deckard is someone who somewhat understands that there's something that is just not worth it anymore. He just wanted to live with Rachel. And he's more focused on that. And that's what he focused on. That's why he left after being able to retire all of the Nexus 6 replicants. And speaking of retiring them, one of them actually died by themselves. And it's Roy Batty's character, played by Rutger Hare. I'm repeating that multiple times because it's just how fascinating this character is. Roy Batty's character is used better in the film compared to the novel. In the novel, he just died off randomly, he just got killed. But in this particular film, he showcased his strengths and how much of a replicant he is with the way he talks. He speaks in poetry, but at the same time in a robot-like manner that you're like, it makes sense. It makes sense. And knowing that this particular actor likes writing monologues for himself, so it's quite understandable. And the way he played with Deckard at the end of it all, knowing that he can catch him no matter what time, he can hit him no matter what time, he can kill him no matter what time. He knows he is in control of all the things that are happening. So he wasn't really in a rush. But at the end of it all, it's really fascinating how the way Blade Runner ended. So Deckard is beaten to death. He doesn't know what to do, and he almost fell out of the building, but Roy saved him. Instead of killing him, Roy sat down, and I think this is one of the best pieces of writing ever for a film. And I really love that this one wasn't really planned to be in there. It was just an idea that was like handed to Ridley Scott at that day, and they used it, and it worked. Um, Basically, the idea that they said, "I've seen things you people wouldn't believe: attack ships on fire off the shoulder of Orion. I've watched sea beams glitter in the dark near the Tannhauser Gate, and all those moments will be lost in time, like tears in rain." And when he said that, it was raining at that rooftop, and you really cannot see if he's crying or not, if there are tears rushing down from his face. And it's a beautiful piece of writing and filmmaking with the way they shot it. I know I'm avoiding to use the word the aesthetic of the film, the cinematography, but this was just perfect in all points and purposes, especially with Vangelis. They really did well in the score for this one. So everything is just perfect for that part, and he just said time to die because he has no other choice. They have a lifespan, and their days will come no matter what they do. And when he just died there, after all that has gone through, I find it really fascinating as to how that particular line somewhat exemplifies not just the difference between replicants and human beings, but the idea is that is there a difference at all? Where these particular androids got to see these wonderful things, all these moments that nobody could ever fathom or understand, but they will all be lost with them once they fade away. It's like the idea of how does one truly live, how does one truly exist. It's like the chase to knowing that you're really alive. Is to live more, longer, but then realizing that he is also limited. He's also going to die. Anyway, he just accepted the fact that he just had to take it all in and understand that everything will come to an end, everything will be lost, and all we have is now. And it's something that I would like to go back to with the end of the film and with Gaff's character. That was the particular moment that when he saw that Roy died, he saw Deckard. Instead of getting Deckard, he just said a particular line. Too bad she doesn't have long to live, but who does? The idea that Gaff is aware of Rachel and Deckard and their lifespan, and is trying to tell that we're all gonna die anyway, that we are all gonna meet that same particular ending, and it's those scenes in the end, the way they are, it's just perfect. I know some people hate Blade Runner for how cinematic it is with its cinematography, just enjoying the effects, but I think it's a way to build up the universe. And I think that's also the problem with 2049 for some viewers with how they're enjoying the shots of these landscapes. But then you paid for that. That's the one you looked for, the universe of it, how it was built. And you get what you wanted with the end of it all. Like, that's just a perfect ending. You don't get the answer as to who is an actual replicant, if it actually makes sense. Why is there a unicorn? Why did he say that particular line? You know what matters in there is simple. We will all be lost in time anyway. So might as well choose what you believe in. And that's what Deckard did. Instead of dwelling on what or what if, he just chose what he felt. And it was to be with Rachel and to escape. And that was the end of the film. And in different versions, which are a little bit polarized, in different endings, there's an actual scene of Deckard and Rachel out during daylight, which is an actual contrast to the whole entire film, which is completely weird and will take you out of it if you watch that version of the film. But then there's a particular piece of writing in there where if only it was shot at the dark, probably would have been better. But the line was delivered perfectly by Rachel about them not having much of a difference anyway. And that somewhat leads more to the question of whether Deckard is human or not. And I know I'm going like circles around that thought, but then when I was a teenager, when I was 18, when I got into those ideas, I was thinking, huh, so all of these things that I've been feeling, all of these things that I've been dealing with, they will all be lost in time anyway. So why bother, right? But then Tears in Rain became somewhat of a thing that saved me a lot because I'm not really good with showing my emotions. So whenever it's raining, somehow somehow that's the only way that I get to show some emotions and just let it all fall out because no one can see it anyway. So it's kind of poetic, the same way that somewhat you're hiding things, somewhat struggling to be human yourself, and you just wanted to feel human after all. But you're afraid to show some human feelings while others are chasing for that specific emotion. So I think the beauty of Blade Runner is what it's truly like to be human. What makes us all different anyway? Aren't we all just trying to live? For now, that's it. And I'll try to live by the idea of not just hiding anymore, just being alive and taking all these moments in time because all we got is now. As much as we want to go back to it, as much as we want to fade in with it, these memories are ours, whether it was as real as it was when we first lived it or not. What truly matters is we had it, we got it, we are it, and I guess we're human. I guess so. Are we? Who knows, right? Maybe we're just part of a simulation. No, I'm just kidding. No, that's not how it works. Peace out.